Okay, I think it's time for us to begin the session. Hello, everyone. Welcome to ICOI inaugural training session on mixed methods with Denise Cloutier. I would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. I'm speaking from Edmonton, Alberta. So I and the University of Alberta respectfully acknowledge that we are situated on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. While we meet today on this virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. So I would like to share that today's session has the option for closed captioning in English or French. And this feature is located in the Zoom chat box. And it'll open a separate window. And I see that a link has already been provided in the chat box. So please make use of it if you wish to have a closed captioning. So my name is Sandeep Agarwal, and I have the privilege to host this session and introduce our presenter today. I'm a professor and director of the School of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Alberta. I'm also the chair of the Education and Training Committee and Economic Research Committee of ICOI. So ICOI is the short form of Inclusive Communities for Older Immigrants. So it's a partnership led by Sapali Guruj at Ryerson University, and it's funded by SSHRC. The project engages in a 7-year multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral, multi-provincial project. It builds on sustainable connections to generate knowledge about social isolation and connectedness among older immigrants, and the aim is ultimately to improve older immigrants' lives. And we are in the 2nd year of the 7-year project. This and upcoming training sessions are developed by the ICOI Education and Training Committee. And I want to thank the members of the committee in putting this together. The session will be held bi-weekly. So you can find more information about the sessions, the upcoming sessions, on the ICOI website at www.icoi.ca, so ICOI.ca. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. The session will be about 40 minutes long, followed by a Q&A period. And this will give you, the participants, and the opportunity to ask questions about the research that Denise will be presenting. You will also have the option to provide any questions through the chat box throughout the presentation. I'll try to monitor the chat box as much as I can. So at this point, I would ask all the viewers to mute your microphones, which I see almost all of you have. So that's fantastic. Now it's 2 years into this, so I'm sure you all know the drill. So without further ado, I would like to briefly introduce our presenter, Denise Cloutier. Her bio was attached to the description of this session. But I just wanted to say that Denise is a health geographer and an advocate of an enhanced quality of life for older adults. She has been a professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Victoria for almost 2 decades. And she currently holds the position of Acting Dean of Research and Graduate Studies for the Faculty of Social Studies. Denise is the ICOI Project's BC Provincial Co-Lead and a member of the ICOI Executive Committee. Welcome, Denise. Thank you. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandeep, for that gracious introduction. I'm going to share my screen here. That's good now. You can all see it.
Yeah, it's good, Denise.
let me just see here a minute. Okay. I'm trying to get, okay, there we go. All right, so my pleasure to be here today with all of you. I had a moment this morning where when I was waking up and was completely groggy, I had a dream that I looked at my clock and it was 10:15 and the session was over. So I had a momentary panic first thing, but I'm grateful that now I'm here on time and I'm here with you. And I'm here on the Lekwungen people's territory, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and the Saanich First Nations. And I'm really looking forward to this session with you and to your questions. So the presentation today, I was going to go through some of the principles around mixed methods research, approaches or design considerations, and then highlight two examples for you from my research, one a social isolation project and one related to housing insecurity, to give you a little bit more of a flavor about mixed methods approaches. So it's good to start probably with framing some core concepts or ideas about qualitative and quantitative research. And this diagram comes from Cresswell, and I apologize that I don't remember the date of the document that I took it from, but it gives us a flavor for what we're thinking about when we talk about mixed methods research. And so we begin from the point of view of paradigms, which if you think of a paradigm, it's kind of like the net that holds all of our ideas related to epistemology, or the ways that we gather knowledge, what we believe about how knowledge is acquired, is our epistemological orientation. Our ontological orientation to the world is related to what we believe about the nature of reality, and whether it is a singular fact or feature of life, or whether we have multiple realities depending on the position that each of us are coming from. Then we have our axiology, which is really our value system, and methodology, which are the approaches that we take to our research projects. So kind of thinking about paradigms first, that net for our beliefs is important and helpful. And then we think about what are the theoretical lenses by which we approach our research. So maybe we're coming from a feminist orientation, or Marxist, or political economy. And the other thing that's important to think about are theoretical lenses, which help to build our research and our understandings about the phenomena that we're studying, is that they can be at the macro, meso, or micro levels, but they are things that inform what we believe and how we proceed with our research. Below that, we can think about methodological approaches. So qualitative, quantitative, and mixed are methodological approaches, as are ethnographies or case studies, just to give you an example of those. And probably the easiest piece for us to get our minds around when we're thinking about the research process and design are the methods that we use. And they're different depending on if we're taking a quantitative or qualitative approach, but they include such things as interviews, surveys, document analysis, diary analyses, etc. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a few moments, but these were just some framing concepts for us to get our heads onto the same page to begin with, more or less. So in recent history, we can kind of think about three essential movements when we're talking about mixed methods research. Quantitative research has been around for a long time, but let's say it has evolved in recent history in the 1950s and 70s, was the predominant paradigm in which people worked, is a paradigm that is focused very much on objectivity, on one truth, one reality that we can find and assess with our research. It's often called positivistic orientations, relates to hypothesis testing, falsification theories, and often has an orientation towards explanation and statistical significance. after that, or in opposition to quantitative research, kind of the recognition that we couldn't learn all we wanted to know by doing research in a quantitative fashion. So what developed was qualitative research, orientations to the world that reflect more on our subjective positions and interpretive views of reality. There are many views of reality, that we can't understand the world and all phenomena from a quantitative perspective, so that qualitative research can deepen our understanding of phenomena. And so this might have been considered an alternative position on research that developed in the 1970s and onward, more or less, and that has a wide range of philosophies and paradigms within which you can work, like phenomenology, ethnography, etc. And then mixed methods research came onto the scene more in the 1990s and onward, and was trying to say, can we combine quantitative and qualitative orientations, paradigms, methodologies to increase and enhance our understanding of phenomena that we're interested in learning about. And this took more of a pragmatic approach, because quantitative and qualitative purists might have said, no, we can't bring these two together. They come from very different epistemological and ontological positions. How can we combine them? And so working from a pragmatic lens, which is focused on practical solutions, realistic solutions, became a way that a mixed methods approach could be taken. Just a little bit of background on that. That's more an abductive reasoning approach, taking information, basic facts, and reaching conclusions that are, again, very grounded in practical, realistic, real world outcomes. So digging a little deeper then into mixed methods research, some would say it is a third methodological movement. So again, following behind quantitative and qualitative. It's a movement that blends and integrates multiple methodologies, multiple theories. On that second item there, I have a note that Johnson et al. In 2007 said that there were about 19 definitions of mixed methods research. All this to say there isn't really a solid singular consensus on what mixed methods research is and how it should be done. So what I'm presenting to you today are kind of my notions and my experiences with mixed methods research. And as you follow up on what this particular way of doing research means, you will perhaps come to slightly different understanding. So I want to make that clear to begin with too. And the third bullet item there is basically saying, for a long time, and even still in the literature, mixed methods research is presented as bringing together quantitative and qualitative research. And so my view would be, it's not quite as simple as that. It can also be bringing together two different qualitative strands of research. And so that will be a debate within the field of mixed methods research as well. And so on the right-hand side, I just have some diagrams. There are some pictures that are really meant to flavor or endorse the idea of mixed methods research offering us different ways of looking at research problems and research questions and approaching them. And so to me, mixed methods research gives you that richness, those different possibilities of looking at our world and its complexities and thinking about how you can move knowledge forward and think about how you might conduct your research. Here's another diagram that kind of illustrates, if you like, the notion that you can talk about mixed methods research as having a greater emphasis on qualitative approaches. So maybe a qualitative dominant approach followed up with a quantitative lesser importance approach on the left-hand side here. And then a pure mixed approach, which would give equal time, consider both the quantitative and the qualitative strand of your research to be equally important. And then on the far right, saying basically that you can also do mixed methods research that is quantitative dominant. And so I'm not sure I favor or support exclusively this idea that one can be dominant over the other, but you do see in the literature a lot of emphasis on that. And my next slide kind of talks about that a little bit more. So just for you to think about bringing qualitative and quantitative methods together and kind of thinking about which one is more important, if it is more important at a certain phase of your research. Here is another slide illustrating some of this. Important to note, again, we do see increased application of mixed methods research, a greater appreciation for what it offers to research projects. And again, this notion of the ordering of approaches. So you see there, I've got capitalized qualitative might be the first stage of a research project. That's the more dominant part of the research study, followed by a quantitative part that is less considered not the primary focus, versus quantitative being dominant and qualitative being subordinate kind of thing. So you see these expressed in the literature in different designs. Janice Morse talks about them, and John Cresswell, who are mixed methods researchers who've been around for a long time. And so I have also put that question there about what's the difference between mixed and multiple research? And that is not clearly laid out in the literature necessarily as well. I don't find the distinctions really between mixed and multiple research approaches to be very, very helpful in a sense, but you might, as you do your research projects, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, and maybe we'll have some questions about that after as well. So we can also think about in our research projects that use mixed methods, are we doing a quantitative and qualitative piece in a sequential fashion or concurrent? Does one precede the other, or are they both occurring at the same time? And so if you think about mixed methods research that way, then you can appreciate that there are a lot of complications that can arise, or a lot of opportunities as well for increasingly sophisticated designs that have multiple dimensions that are quantitative and qualitative, et cetera, that are embedded, that are concurrent or sequential. So again, the complexity of a research design can be increased. And I'm going to say a little bit more about triangulation later on, but just to say at this point in time, bringing together quantitative and qualitative approaches offers us a different mechanism for looking at triangulation, which I'm going to talk about the strengths of both quantitative and qualitative research and how mixed methods research really enhances those strengths by bringing them both together. So some of the design considerations for employing mixed methods approaches, things that you can think about, some of which I've already highlighted a little bit, are the timing of the phases, whether they're quantitative and qualitative to begin with, or qualitative and qualitative. Quantitative and quantitative pieces of a research project have not so much been defined historically, and that's because quantitative approaches were predominant for so long. So you don't see a mixed methods approach talking about two different quantitative arms so much as you do quantitative and qualitative, or qualitative and qualitative, if that makes sense. And we can talk about that too if you like. But so the timing of the quantitative and qualitative phases, whether they're sequential or concurrent, is part of what you need to think about with your mixed methods design. Second item there, the weighting. Again, are you in your research design giving priority to qualitative, the qualitative arm or the quantitative arm, or do they carry equal weight in your research project? And these things all come into play when you're thinking about your research questions, the range of disciplines who are involved on your research team and what they bring to the team and how they have been conducting their work, the theories that you're using, what levels those theories are at, macro, meso, micro, and how they can be blended to enhance understanding of what you're doing your research on. Yeah, so those are the kinds of questions related to how are you mixing your approaches and what is your rationale for the way that you are considering constructing your research design. And then the theorizing piece, are you testing theory? Are you building theory? Are you integrating multiple theories? These are things that you want to consider within the context of your team as you're planning your design too. And they can kind of lead you in a direction of, well, am I doing more inductive or theory building work? Or am I doing more deductive theory testing work? And those, again, draw back to quantitative and qualitative arms of a project often. So if we think about the sampling for the study, we know that if we're using a quantitative approach for one arm of the mixed methods project, we are generally looking at goals that are related to explanation, exploration, or description. And we're looking at large sample sizes more often than not that are representative, that everybody has the same chance of being sampled in a research project. And so big considerations given to size, to random populations, and then some more complex ways of thinking about how we're getting to our population. Will it be stratified? Will it be systematic or cluster, etc.? So these are considerations that we have in developing the project more fully if we're working from a quantitative approach. And then in the qualitative area, we're usually working in a more exploratory or interpretive sense. And our samples are generally purposive or selective. If we wanted to pursue certain questions about the meaning of social isolation for older adults, it might not be as appropriate to do a large sample, although actually I'm going to talk, the example that I'm going to talk about kind of looks at social isolation from a large population-based sense, as well as the meaning of social isolation in individuals' lives. But we tend to think in a qualitative orientation, we're looking at small sample sizes and more in-depth learning through interviews, through multiple interviews, through diaries that we combine with the interviews, etc. So it's kind of that contrast between wide knowledge and statistical significance in the quantitative realm and deep, rich meaning in the qualitative realm. And these lead us to different ways of thinking about our sample in the qualitative world, snowball sampling, theoretical sampling, etc. So different ways of thinking about the research project in a mixed method study and what it means to employ these quantitative and qualitative aspects of the project. So what are some of the methods that we use in mixed methods projects? These will be common and understandable to most of us on the call this morning. We use surveys, we use in-depth interviews, focus groups, participant observation, and other methods and tools we might employ: photo voice, video, drawing, community mapping, narratives, document analyses. You know, sometimes you see these used in quantitative studies and sometimes in qualitative, but they, again, are just, I'm just putting them here to illustrate the possibilities. And again, in our research teams, we think about, well, what are the best methods for us to get at the data that we need to address our research questions and to build theory or test theory if that's part of our project. Just briefly to highlight some of the strengths of quantitative methods, there are specific rules of research practice. They're generally based on a sound conceptual or theoretical model. They emphasize validity and reliability in the measures or constructs that are employed. They use probability-based sampling methods, do analyses based on inferential statistics, and have rules for judging the size, effect size, strength of the research findings, validity, reliability, generalizability, and some of those types of things. The strength of qualitative studies, on the other hand, they are more theoretically grounded in social theory. They're informed and directed by deep analysis and meaningful questions. So again, quantitative gives us really a broad understanding of phenomena, and qualitative research generally tends to deepen that understanding, looking at human experience, lived experience, meaning, etc. There is also qualitative software increasingly used to undertake thematic analyses. As we know, numerical data goes into spreadsheets, and statistical analysis packages like R and Python and SAS and Stata, large numbers, many variables to analyze. And in the qualitative world, we're working with textual data, large files with a lot of text in them. And increasingly, there are software packages being developed to help with those forms of analyses as well, like in vivo, ethnograph, deduce, etc. And many researchers on this call will have some ideas about packages that they have used in the past and some of the strengths and weaknesses of those. In my own experiences, I have mostly used in vivo. But some of these other ones are quite common in the field as well. So that brings me to the two examples that I wanted to take you through to explore mixed methods again in some practical examples. I'm going to try not to focus so much on the results, but more on the design of these. So the first project I'm going to talk about is a study on social isolation that I was the principal investigator on with Karen Kobayashi, who's also part of the ICOI project and is on the call this morning too. And this project was funded by CIHR. We had to pivot a few times on it, just as often happens for researchers, based on a few different things that happened when we were trying to mobilize the project. But it essentially had two phases, and they were sequential mixed methods project, a quantitative phase followed by a qualitative phase. There's a little bit of a picture of the design of this a little bit more. This study was done in 2006 to 2011. And our objective for phase one was to develop a profile of social isolation among older adults in British Columbia. Way back in 2003 in BC, social isolation was recognized as a fact that increased the vulnerability of older adults to poorer health outcomes. So we received this research money from CIHR, and we did the first phase using our telephone survey research center at the University of Victoria. And they had to make 30,000 calls to households in British Columbia to end up with a sample of 1,064 older adults who completed surveys for us about their health and service use habits and their friend networks, etc. And we used the shortened James Lubin social network scale that asks 6 questions related to family and friend networks, people to talk to about private matters, who you could share confidences with. And through that process in the first phase, we identified that 181 in the sample were at risk of social isolation, according to that Lubin scale. And that was about 17% of the people of the entire sample who were at risk of social isolation. And so in that second phase, we undertook qualitative interviews with 27 of them randomly selected from the 181. And in that second phase, qualitative phase, we were interested in understanding the experience of social isolation among this group of older adults who were defined according to the Lubin scale as being at risk. So we have the objective, the overall project objective, to better understand social isolation and the characteristics of individuals, the risk factors, and how people experienced social isolation. Kind of already mentioned all of these things. So just to show you just very briefly some of the quantitative data that came out of this project on the 181 who were at risk of social isolation. What we could clearly see is that those individuals were more vulnerable in terms of being older, having more chronic conditions, having more days that their physical health wasn't good, etc., compared with the non-socially isolated. So we felt that it was a robust sample in the sense of we were looking at factors that appeared to make these individuals more vulnerable. And we did a logistic regression analysis of these individuals and again found that age was important for risk of social isolation. Oddly, maybe we found that males were more vulnerable to social isolation, those with poorer health status, those who rented rather than owned their own home. And in this project, we found that being from another country than the US or the UK heightened risk of being socially isolated, as did lower levels of religiosity were influential in risk of social isolation. So we took the quantitative data and our understanding of them. And then, as I say, we pulled a random sample of 27 individuals out of this to look at them in greater depth, to try to understand their experience of being socially isolated, and looking at them as individuals in a web of relationships in the community, and experiences of loneliness versus solitude, background characteristics of widowhood, etc. And we landed on resilience versus vulnerability as important things for us to consider in greater depth in the qualitative analyses. And so what we kind of came to was a characterization of these older adults in terms of being socially isolated by circumstances, which we called enhanced vulnerability, or socially isolated by choice, which we called resilience. For those that were more vulnerable, we found that they were more socially isolated or at risk of social isolation due to their caregiving roles, due to declines in personal health. If they were immigrants, they had perhaps experienced many moves across their lives, and these made them more vulnerable or more at risk, etc., etc. So this characterization of vulnerability or resilience was important to us. And when we looked at those that were socially isolated by choice, we found that, in fact, using this Lovin scale, which was a quantitative scale that enumerated friendships and with relationships with friends and family, and kind of, put a number to that. So if you had a Lovin score of less than 12, you were at risk of social isolation. If it was higher, you were not at risk. But the emphasis was on numbers rather than the quality of the relationships with people. And so when we were looking at the characterizations of people who were actually isolated, but they in fact preferred their own solitude. So they said, I'm used to being by myself. I don't like socializing with people so much. So this again is important in the context of the ICOI project as well, and drawing our attention to not just the quantity of people that we can rely on in our lives, but the quality of those relationships. So that sort of those distinctions between social isolation and loneliness are very important. So the second example that I was going to show you is this study related to housing insecurity. The research project that I'm the principal investigator on right now. It's called Solutions to Health and Homelessness for Older Women. And its purpose is to explore the pathways into and out of homelessness for older women. And older women are an understudied, invisible, and often stigmatized group among those who are experiencing homelessness. There's not a lot of literature and not a lot of understanding about these these women who tend to be very marginalized and sometimes forgotten, even in the context of others who are more well known among the homeless population, younger individuals, males, etc. So this is also a sequential, mixed or multiple methods design, depending on how you position those things. It has two qualitative dimensions, though. The project doesn't have a quantitative arm at this point in time. It has a phase 1 that we have just completed, which was to understand the system serving older individuals, older women who have experienced homelessness. And it involved qualitative interviews over Zoom with service providers and qualitative interviews over Zoom or on the telephone with women with lived expertise of homelessness. And this is not necessarily the ideal way to interview women with lived expertise, but it was the only way that we could do the project because this funding came through basically right when COVID landed. So it required shifting a lot of things around from the way the project had originally been conceptualized. So phase 1, qualitative interviews. Phase 2, which is underway right now, is employing arts-based methods to build understanding of women's experiences with one another, to share their stories with one another, and also to reduce the trauma that they have experienced and try to look for ways that are healing, that hear women's stories, that try to understand and reduce the trauma that they have experienced. So it's the first time for me and a number of members on our team. Karen Kobayashi is also on this project. And one of the first times that we're employing these arts-based methods to see how they can help to facilitate healing and health. So in our first phase with qualitative interviews with service providers, we have done 23 interviews with people who are part of BC Housing, Our Place and Kool-Aid. These are organizations that may not exist in your area, but just to give you a flavor of the range of service providers who were interviewed for this project. And that was followed up by staggered interviews with women with lived experience, and they come from different types of housing environments, assisted living, women's shelters, sheltering hotels, where people who were living on the street or in tents were put in the sheltering hotels when COVID landed. So we've had a chance to interview 16 of these women and undertaking thematic analyses of the service provider interviews and also the interviews with women to solidify our understanding of their experiences and try to create priority recommendations to move the system forward in a more positive direction. So we've kind of used a tree theme a lot at this point in our analyses, thematic analysis, divided it up into system-related factors, individual people factors, personal factors, and system supports. And I'm not going to take you through all this, but it just was a way for us to capture the themes that we were finding and try to convey them in sharing the stories of the women with one another in this case. So as I mentioned, we brought the women together to tell them, to share the thematic analysis with them, and then to offer them some different arts-based activities to enrich or deepen our understanding of their experiences. And also, as mentioned, to kind of emphasize more of a healing aspect to their experiences as well. So we came up with this exercise of using the tree as a metaphor again, thinking of women as being resilient like trees, grounded in relationships and buffering one another against impossible circumstances. We gave them each a tree, and we gave them a series of icons to put on the tree to reflect their experiences again, to help us deepen our understanding of aspects of the community that were either supportive or restrictive for them, aspects of home space that were meaningful, their relationships with other people in their worlds or animals that were considered important, and what they felt were key creature comforts for them in trying to be more securely housed. So we asked them questions as, what shapes your sense of place and feelings of belonging where you live? And what or who gives you strength and helps you to be resilient? So here again, too, we then took anecdotes from their interviews and we placed them on a tree, and the tree was part of the room that they were in when we were sharing stories together, and they could go up to it and they could look at it and they could read their words and understand that they were part of this larger project to understand women's experiences and that their voices were being heard. And just one that I would read by this key icon says, a home means a key to the front door where I can walk through my own front door, a bathtub, a closet, a kitchen sink, a key to my own front door, and I would call that my home. Again, just thinking about qualitative research and the way that stories are so important to elevating women's experiences, to sharing them with one another, and to sharing them with service providers. And so this is kind of the stage that we're at with this research project. I'm just bringing it forward to illustrate another form of mixed methods research that is two qualitative dimensions, just to share with you something that's not fully formed, that's not complete. This is just where we're at today. And so I have one more slide to kind of try to bring some of these things together for you and then to open it up for questions. So just to conclude, mixed methods approaches are powerful and flexible methodologies. There is not really a consensus on what they are. Referring back to that article by Johnson that said there's 19 definitions in the article that they wrote about mixed methods research. So kind of, again, I emphasize you sometimes have to find your own way through these literatures. And I've tried to give you some guidelines on design considerations, the timing of the phases, qualitative, quantitative, or multiple qualitative, etc. The weighting that you give to them, being thoughtful and intentional with the mixing, thinking about is it appropriate here to use a quantitative and qualitative aspect in my project? Why is it appropriate? What is my rationale for doing that? How do these two ways of undertaking research contribute to my research questions and my overall goals? So these are things that you have to be very thoughtful about, combining theories, approaching the work from a more pragmatic orientation. In my mind, and I hope I've tried to illustrate the way that mixed methods research builds and consolidates different types of evidence to answer linked or related questions, maybe singular questions, maybe a core question with multiple sub-questions. So again, I would underscore that I think mixed methods research is very important, very powerful to bring us different insights on the work that we do in so many different areas. It has the strength of triangulation because it is bringing different data sources together, different theoretical orientations to build knowledge. I believe mixed methods research increases the insights gained. In that simple way, I was talking about quantitative research often giving us an R squared or chi-squared values or t-test results that give us really a broad sense of a sample, but they won't give us that in-depth information about individual experience and help us with action-oriented outcomes at times that actually seem to be more possible with mixed methods approaches. And mixed methods increases the insights gained, adds value. Sometimes you have to look at different evaluation criteria for the work. I mean, one of the challenges with mixed methods research is sometimes what I see happening is an inclination to maybe emphasize quantitative more than qualitative approaches. And we can talk about that more if that's helpful. And then finally, that mixed methods research offers very pragmatic, solutions-oriented, real-world, practically focused research that has heightened opportunity with policymakers, decision makers, perhaps for affecting social change. And I think I'll stop right there. I think that's about my time, I think, right, Sandeep?
Yes, yes, right on time.
Okay, so let's see what people think or what questions individuals have.
Thank you.
Shall I stop sharing my screen here?
Yes, that'll be great. So thank you very much, Denise, for a wonderful presentation. Very nicely stressed the importance, the power of mixed methods. So we'll now open up for questions and answers portion of the session. So as I mentioned before, type in your questions in the chat box or just use the raise hand feature and I'll look for you on my screen.
Sandeep, I see Jill has put a comment in the chat box of a sign of too much work, meaning mixed methods research is in.
No, sorry, this was sorry, that was a reaction when you were talking about your nightmare dream at the beginning.
Oh,
a lot of us are having this kind of dreams. That's an old comment.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, so I see a question that has just popped up in the chat box. So I'm going to read it for you. Thank you for your informative presentation, Dr. Cloutier. What are some common mistakes that you have noticed in mixed methods research designs?
Yeah, some common mistakes. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure I will be answering this question as it is intended, but I think where I was going a little bit in the conclusions was saying that what I have seen in the evaluation of mixed methods approaches is people kind of looking at either qualitative designs or quantitative, but ending up judging the qualitative components on the basis of quantitative criteria. So sort of, if you think about scoping reviews, or where they might say, well, I reviewed 19 studies, 6 were qualitative, 4 were mixed, and the rest were quantitative. And then in their analysis, they will be saying, in future, a control group should be used, or the sample sizes should be larger. And so when I see those kinds of conclusions, I think that doesn't seem appropriate for mixed methods designs, because you're actually dismissing in some ways the value of the qualitative work, which has never been designed to be addressing statistical significance and large sample size. So I think one of the, I'm not sure it's a common mistake, but it is a misinterpretation of the value. Like, we still have to be thinking of the value of these projects in different ways. And I think one of the things that it puts onto researchers is to be defining at the outset the criteria that you're going to use in your research project to help with assessing its value. So maybe you're looking again at truthfulness, at authenticity, at to some degree at generalizability, but again, that's often tied to large sample size, right? So if we're doing a mixed methods project in various provinces, we've got the different provinces to compare, as we do in the ICOI study. And if we're doing similar designs in each province, it's a small sample size in each province, but then we have the comparability of doing that in the different provinces and aligning the results, trying to say, you know, what, how do they differ and why do they differ? So I think it calls upon different explanatory skills a little bit, but I don't like to see like that's the challenge with it too, right? If I do a mixed methods project, am I valuing each side of each phase of the project as well? Anyway, is that helpful? Does that answer your question, or would you like to redirect your question, Abdul Riza? Okay.
Yeah, says thank you. So great. So while folks are still thinking about the questions, I have a question, Denise. So let me start off by saying I'm a big fan of mixed methods. I think that's the way to go to do the research. You bring the two different methods, and I'm talking about, by mixed method, mixing quantitative and qualitative. But my question is, especially, and I'm kind of saying this on the behalf of folks here who are into the publishing side of things, when you have a paper or a research, a paper based on a research which has mixed method, when you go for publishing, what happens generally is that it goes to a reviewer who is good into quantitative side, it goes to another reviewer who is in qualitative side, and you get two very different sets of comments. Quantitative will say, well, it's not good enough. Qualitative will say it's not good enough. So
oh boy,
what's your advice?
Well, that is really an important question that you ask, and everybody would nod and say, yes, been there, had those comments on reviews, right? And what do we do with that? Yeah, it's always a big challenge. I do redirects, well, that wasn't the intention of this project. It's qualitative. It's not a large sample, kind of trying to refute the reviewers in those gentle ways of educating about how they've misinterpreted what you've done, I guess. But that's why I would underscore again in the article earlier on, emphasizing these are the criteria that we use to gauge, the quality of our work. Because I think researchers don't often do that. They're not explicit. And in a quantitative world, we just take it for granted that we're, well, it will be in papers too, but yet there's more of a taken for grantedness. And yet at the same time, qualitative researchers are called to a different standard to really define why their work should be considered high quality. So that is a real challenge. You've hit the nail on the head, a big area. I know one of the strategies some researchers employ is to split the projects up, right? And send them to different journals because they don't feel they're going to be understood and taken up and published in as easy a fashion sometimes. On the other hand, there are also more mixed methods journals, that may be proper venues. So I guess that's the other part of it, being more selective on the journals that we present and send things to as well, and their receptiveness to different ways of thinking about research.
No, good advice. I like your idea of talking more about the importance of mixed method and why it's being used for that research early on in the paper itself. So thank you for that. I see a question in the chat box from Jill, and Jill, I see you with your video on, so why don't you ask your question?
I was just thinking about the like pros and cons of taking a mixed methods approach when you're trying to influence policy.
Yeah.
And if you had some thoughts on that, like I think it's related a bit to what Sandeep is saying, but there's other advantages too.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think, even way back when Karen and I had started the social isolation project, and we were partnered with the BC Ministry of Health, and in those conversations, we would talk to them about the quantitative data and the results that we had, and then talk about the qualitative results as well. But I can remember the number of ministry people who said, well, it's the story that really helps us to lever change, right? When we can put a real face on it. Yeah, it's great. Thanks for your figures. but those personal faces and the stories are sometimes the levers that really make change. So I think in the policy realm, mixed methods has more cachet, can be higher regarded more highly for these reasons. It does give both pictures. But I don't end up writing myself specifically for policy journals more, which is, as you asked that question, I'm thinking, oh, that's really unfortunate. I should be aiming more things for that world more, because I think it's an easier argument to make going into policy journals. But you know, that I suppose on the other hand, that's the revolution that's happening in the academy now too, isn't it? These thoughts about what, it's not just journal articles that make a difference. It is our efforts at op-eds and position papers and the ministry partnerships and health region partnerships that we have that we value and that actually maybe foster more change, but they don't register as those peer-reviewed. How many peer-reviewed articles do you have? So I believe we're getting more and more sophisticated on that front too. And those are underlain by mixed methods approaches, you know, bringing, hey, you need more evidence to make this decision here. We've got this piece, you know, we can sit down with you and figure out what the implications are, what priority recommendations come out. It would be nice to think that we can action mixed methods research more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Denise. And once again, folks, keep your questions coming. I see a question in the chat box. And the question is, what advice do you have for balancing qualitative and quantitative data in mixed method research?
Yes, another excellent question. I think what I would always resort to saying there is, what are the research questions? In my mind, they are always the anchor that you're using, and or anchors if you have more than one question kind of thing. And so then it's about, how am I going to get answers to these research questions? Then I know that oh, well, maybe it's a, maybe I need to do a qualitative questionnaire, not qualitative questionnaire, a focus group with decision makers first, because that's going to give me the information that I need to, maybe it's to more fully develop my questions. I'm not answering that very well for you, but I think it's really a matter of, what are my research questions, and then what are the most appropriate methods to address those questions. And when I get that more firmly in my mind or with my research team, then it suggests the approaches, right, that and their sequencing. So, and sometimes actually developing the research questions is a big challenge for us, right? What are the key questions we're going after here? And in more inductive work, we keep developing those questions as we go too. So yeah, but the balancing act to me really does come from my sense and the team's sense of, are these our key questions? And then what is the best approach? And then you can decide which one should take precedence, or are they equivalent, or do I need to do quantitative and qualitative, again, not concurrent approach, or sequentially? Because really in my project, to answer my questions, I have to learn from one first and then move on to the next phase. So that's kind of a long-winded answer. I hope that it's a good question, and it will change from every project, but I would always go back to the research questions and their delineation, and then how do you move forward to answer them?
No, thanks for that, Denise. I see another question. This is sort of as a classic question. What would you say is an adequate sample size for qualitative research to ensure a rigorous sample?
Yes.
And then there's another question attached to it. how does employing a mixed method approach impact that number?
Very good questions as well. An adequate sample size for qualitative research. Well, that varies depending on the type of qualitative research you're doing. So grounded theory, for example, would say you have to keep gathering interviews until you have what they will call theoretical saturation, right? You're getting no new answers. You've kind of got your research questions being addressed, and you've maybe interviewed 10 people and you feel, okay, it's answered now. I've got my sample size. So grounded theory would be having you be guided by that notion of theoretical saturation. I don't think most other forms of qualitative theory have that notion of what is the exact sample size that I need. Qualitative research doesn't tend to use effect sizes and power in our calculations, so we don't have a number that we're aiming for. Sometimes it's driven by, I really feel I have a grasp of this phenomena. Sometimes it's driven in pragmatic ways, but I've run out of time with my data collection as a PhD student or master student. So this is the number that I've got at the end of the day. And other approaches, if you're doing a phenomenological approach or autobiographical approach, one interview could be enough. Multiple times, that again, in-depth knowledge, it depends on your sense of, do I have enough information? Am I answering my research questions? And how does employing a mixed method approach impact that number? That's a really good question too. And I think it may be that you would go back and resample after you take on, say, I've done some qualitative work here now. Now I'm going to do a broader base survey, do some quantitative work, gather a certain number of samples. Yeah, so I think in the context of a more sequential project and an integrated project that way, it might change your numbers or it might not. Again, it just depends. Good questions. I don't have a definitive answer to that. How does employing a mixed method approach impact that number? I guess it will depend on those conversations with the team about where you're at with your data analysis, both quantitative and qualitative. Do you have to go get more? Maybe it informs that, oh, we've actually missed the decision makers in this project, or we've missed the end users somehow. We've only been talking to the service provider. So in a project that's long-term and where you have that flexibility to keep adding and building, that could be one way or some ways that the project is impacted longer term.
Mm-hmm. So Denise, I see another, I think it's kind of related to the previous question. Since mixed methods have a quantitative component, how can we determine sample size? It pretty much builds on the previous question, unless you want to add something. I think you've answered it. And
yeah, I don't think I have much more to say about that other than, again, what are the research questions for your quantitative piece? Have your statistical people given you power calculations, and have you looked at the effect size you're working towards? So that guides how many people you need to interview for that piece or survey. Yeah. Yep. I can't really add much more to that one, I don't think, Sandeep.
Okay, no worries. So let me throw in a question from my side, Denise. You talked about, at least in one of your slides, you said mixed method or multiple method. Are the two things same or are they different?
Yeah, that's another great question, Sandeep. So that varies depending on who you read in the literature. My belief is that I feel there's not a lot of useful distinctions between mixed and multiple methods. How I do distinguish them in my mind is a mixed methods project is more integrated around the research goals and purpose and questions. And multiple methods is more likely, in my estimation, to have different research questions that are being answered with specific methods. And so that question about how much are they tied to the overall purpose and goals is an important one for me. But I don't feel that the distinctions are super helpful in my estimation from what I've learned. But I do think I do feel that the distinctions come around based on the purpose and goals and research questions a little bit more. Yeah.
Okay. Very well. Denise, it seems like we have exhausted all the questions and we are 10 minutes past the hour. So I think it's a good time to wrap it up. I wanted to say thank you for kicking off the ICOI training series. It was a wonderful session. I wanted to give a shout out to Kerith Paul, and Kerith, if you could just open your video for a minute. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Jared Althouse. I mean, these are the two folks who are working behind the scenes, doing all the invitations and Eventbrite and such. Yes. So thank you very much. And yes, thank you to the rest of you who joined us today. Just so you know that this presentation will be available on the ICOI website in the coming weeks. So please, take a look at this one. Those who have not attended, you can pass this information on. And look out for our upcoming sessions, and they will also be on the ICOI website. Our next session will be on Friday of February 11th, same time. So whatever your time zone is, but it's going to be 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And the topic is consent law, disability rights, and research inclusion. And it's by Krista James, who is from Canadian Center for Elder Law. So I think it's going to be another great presentation. So we are almost at the end of wrapping this up. Thank you very much and take care. And I see in the chat a lot of thank yous coming. So once again, Denise, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, too, for all your attention and great questions. It's great to be here with you all.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye and have yourself a great day.
Bye-bye.